They said she talked too much. In a land where voices of women were often buried under temple stones and royal edicts, Khenmet dared to let hers rise, not in defiance, but in wonder. As a child, she would ask the stars why they blinked, question why the Nile wept every season, and sing to birds with a voice like a soft reed flute. But wonder was dangerous in a house like hers. Her father was a man of rigid belief and bruised pride, a scribe who once dreamt of royal court life, but ended up counting baskets of barley in a backwater village near Thebes. Every time Khenmet asked why, his hand answered with silence. Her mother watched from the shadows, a ghost of a woman who had once sung lullabies, now mute with fear. By 12, Khenmet had learned that questions led to pain, and by 15, she had stopped speaking altogether. Not just in the house, but in life. Even at the market, when vendors would ask her if she wanted dried figs or pomegranate juice, she'd point. The words were there, coiled like vipers in her throat, but she wouldn't set them free. The villagers whispered about her. Some said she was cursed, others that she was touched by the gods. But all agreed on one thing: she was strange, and strange things should stay quiet. Then came Menmatre. He wasn't like the other men who passed through the village looking for laborers or livestock. He came with a papyrus scroll tucked under one arm and a basket of reed flutes in the other. Some said he had been a priest once, exiled for speaking against the high priest of Amun. Others claimed he was mad. But Khenmet saw him for what he truly was, a man who listened. He would sit by the Nile, playing his flutes, letting the wind finish his sentences. The first time their eyes met, she didn't look away. The second time, he nodded. The third time, he placed a small reed flute on the stone beside her and walked away. She didn't touch it for days, but every afternoon he'd return and sit beside her in silence. One day, he hummed a tune, not loudly, just enough for the water to carry. It was a melody her mother used to hum when she thought no one was listening. Khenmet froze. Her hands shook. Tears welled in her eyes for the first time in years. She didn't know how he knew that tune, but something cracked open. That night, alone in her small room, she picked up the flute and mimicked the tune. It was shaky, broken, but it was a beginning. When she returned the next day, Menmatre smiled and hummed again. Day by day, note by note, she learned to sing through her breath, not with words, but with melody. The bruises on her skin began to fade, but the scars inside her still stung. One morning, her father caught her humming. His slap came like thunder. She fell, the flute breaking beneath her. But this time, she didn't stay silent. She looked him in the eye, her lip bleeding, and said 4 words that would change everything. "I will not stop." He stared, stunned. She had spoken. Khenmet ran from the house and found Menmatre waiting by the river, as if he knew. She collapsed beside him, sobbing. He said nothing. He simply handed her another flute, carved with the lotus petals. That evening, her song rose over the reeds. The village paused to listen. The girl who once whispered to stars was learning to roar like the sun. Word of Khenmet's voice traveled faster than the Nile's current. At first it was mere gossip, the mute girl who suddenly sang. But when elders began noticing that their grandchildren followed her to the riverbank to hear her play, they grew uneasy. Women should not draw crowds, especially not women who had once been silent. One afternoon, as she played a tune that mimicked the wind rustling through date palms, an old priest named Panafer approached her. He was tall and thin, draped in linen stiffened with incense and pride, and his shadow fell long over her flute. "The gods do not approve of songs from broken mouths," he said, voice sharp as obsidian. Khenmet looked up, meeting his gaze with the calm strength Menmatre had helped her find. "Then they must not have ears," she replied, and resumed playing. Panafer scowled but said nothing more. He walked away, sandals thudding like judgments against the earth. That night, guards came to Menmatre's hut. They claimed he was misleading the youth, corrupting minds with sound and rebellion. He did not resist. He handed over his flutes with reverence, as if offering sacred relics, and walked with them into the darkness. Khenmet followed at a distance, unseen. They led him to the temple courtyard, where torches flickered like angry spirits. She pressed her body against the sandstone wall and watched as Panifer accused him before a circle of priests. "You were cast out for questioning the sacred words, yet here you are sowing noise in our silence," Panifer barked. Menmatra bowed his head. "I sow hope where you have sown fear." The priests gasped. Panifer stepped forward, face flushed. "Silence him." They struck him with rods meant for punishing criminals, but Menmatra did not cry out. Khenmet trembled, fists clenched. She wanted to run, to scream, to fight, but her limbs refused to move. The next morning, villagers found Menmatre bruised and bleeding by the riverbank. Khenmet knelt beside him, tears silent but scorching. He coughed, a weak smile on his lips. "You still have your voice," he whispered. "Use it." That day, Khenmet walked to the temple square during the midday sun, when every soul was outside, seeking shade or prayer. She stood on the edge of the sacred fountain and lifted the new flute Menmatre had once carved for her, a longer one, deep-toned and solemn. The guards moved toward her, but she played before they could act. The sound was haunting, full of sorrow and fury and unspoken truth. It echoed through sandstone walls and stirred the air like a forgotten spell. People stopped. Even the priests hesitated. Panifer emerged, robes flaring. "This is blasphemy," he shouted. "She speaks for the condemned." A voice from the crowd called out, "No, she speaks for all of us." And then another, "Let her finish." Khenmet did not stop playing. She played until her fingers bled and her lungs ached, until even the guards stood still. When the last note faded, the silence that followed was not empty. It was reverent. That evening, Menmatre lay beneath a date tree, fading. Khenmet sat beside him, holding his hand. "They listened," she said. He smiled one final time. "Then the gods truly have ears." As stars blinked to life above, Khenmet whispered a song not from her flute, but her lips, soft, trembling, free. She had spoken, she had sung, and the world had heard her. After Menmatre's death, the river stopped singing, or so it felt to Khenmet. The waters still flowed, the reeds still swayed, but the silence within her was louder than ever before. She had lost the man who gave her melody, the only soul who saw her not as a shadow, but as light. Yet the village had changed. Children now hummed her tunes, women whispered her defiant words, and the priests, though bitter and wounded in pride, had not dared silence her again. The temple doors remained closed to her, but the world beyond had opened. One morning, a young girl named Tepi knocked on her door. Barely 10, with eyes like the Nile under moonlight, she held out a broken reed flute. "I tried to play, but it won't sound," she said, voice trembling. Khenmet smiled gently, took the instrument, and with a few swift adjustments, fixed it. She handed it back. "Try again." Tepi played a wobbly note that startled a bird from a nearby fig tree. The girl's face lit with joy. That was the moment Khenmet understood. Her song was not meant to be hers alone. It was meant to be passed on. Day after day, children came, young girls mostly. Some had been silenced like her, others were simply curious. She taught them what Menmatre had taught her, not just how to play, but how to feel, how to breathe, how to listen. She told them stories between melodies, of stars who spoke and rivers that remembered. Soon, her home became a place of rhythm and laughter, of dreams escaping through flutes and tambourines. But not everyone welcomed this. One afternoon, 3 temple scribes arrived, stern-faced and silent. They found her beneath the tamarisk tree, surrounded by girls learning rhythm with palm claps and hollow clay drums. "You are raising defiance," one accused. "You teach girls to be loud." Khenmet stood, her expression calm but unyielding. "I teach them to be heard." The scribes glared, But the crowd of villagers behind her had grown. Farmers, mothers, even elders watched silently, and none stepped forward to stop her. The scribes left, but the warning was clear. That night, Khenmet visited the edge of the desert alone. She sat under the stars, her flute cradled in her lap, and whispered Menmatre's name into the wind. "What do I do now?" she asked the darkness. The answer came not in words, but in memory. The first time he had handed her a flute, the way he had said nothing and simply waited. He had trusted her to find her path. She would do the same. When she returned, she etched a new name into the front wall of her home, House of Echoes, a place for every girl who had ever been told to stay quiet. Within weeks, people from neighboring villages arrived. Mothers brought daughters. Some sent sons. Some came for music. Others came simply to remember what freedom sounded like. The House of Echoes became a sanctuary, one not built from stone or gold, but from courage and melody. One evening, as Khenmet played her flute beneath the gathering dusk, an elder woman approached and laid a hand on her shoulder. "Your name," she said, "has traveled farther than the pharaohs." Khenmet looked to the horizon, where the wind carried her song across the fields. For the first time, she believed it. She had once been beaten for speaking. Now the wind itself carried her voice. The House of Echoes flourished, but the temple seethed. High Priest Panefer had not forgotten the day Khenmet silenced the square with nothing but a flute. To him, she was not a girl. She was a disruption, a crack in the walls of sacred order. Each day she taught was another day tradition unraveled. And now, girls were turning down arranged marriages, quoting Khenmet's phrases like prayers. One evening, as the sun painted the limestone walls in red-gold streaks, a group of guards surrounded her home. Not rough-handed soldiers, but temple enforcers in linen and silence. Panefer stood at their head. His face was tight, lips bloodless, eyes burning with ceremonial pride. "You have until the next full moon to close this place," he said. "No woman teaches without the blessing of the gods." Khenmet stood barefoot at the doorway, her flute hanging by a reed string from her shoulder. "The gods gave me breath. I'm only returning it." "You confuse the people," he snapped. "You stir chaos in hearts meant to be still." "Hearts were never meant to be still," she replied. "They beat, they break, they sing." That night, fear returned. It crawled into her chest, wrapping itself around her ribs like the hands of her father from years ago. The old terror of being dragged, punished, shamed. It whispered again. But then came a knock. Not guards this time. It was Tepi, with 5 other girls. "We heard what he said," the child whispered. "We won't let them take this away." Khenmet looked at the small circle of determined faces and felt the fear ease. "Then we must be louder." Over the following days, the House of Echoes became more than a school. It became a movement. Families brought offerings. Farmers donated baskets of grain and goats. Even the sick came, asking for healing songs. Khenmet began composing new melodies, ones that held the ache of generations. Each tune carried a story, of a mother who never got to speak, of a bride who ran from chains, of a girl who sang through pain. The melodies spread like desert fire. Even the priest's own servants hummed them while sweeping temple floors. And still, the full moon crept closer. The day before it rose, a young boy slipped into her courtyard with a scroll. It bore the temple's seal and one line of command: cease or suffer removal. That night, Khenmet did not sleep. She walked to the river where Menmatre had once played in peace. She lit a clay lamp and held it against the darkness. "Am I doing right?" she whispered. The water did not answer, but her own reflection stared back. Strong, scarred, no longer afraid. At dawn, she stood before the House of Echoes, flanked by girls and women, flutes strung across their shoulders like weapons of wind. The villagers gathered too, fathers who had once ignored their daughters, mothers who had never dared speak, sons who now understood the beauty of softness. And then came Panefer. This time not with guards. but with the pharaoh's decree, a royal edict written in red ink, damning her place as unauthorized worship. But before he could speak it aloud, Khenmet raised her flute. One note, then another, then many. Dozens of voices joined, not in protest, but in unity. A wave of music, rich and defiant, swept through the air like the scent of lotus in bloom. Panefer's voice faltered. He could not read the decree over the sound of liberation. The high priest turned and walked away. And though the moon rose full and bright that night, the house of echoes remained, lit by lamps filled with song. The moon hung high, silver and ancient, watching silently as Khenmet and her followers stood their ground. The house of echoes glowed with clay lamps, shadows of girls dancing against the mud-brick walls as they played flutes, sang soft harmonies, and refused to be erased. But silence from the temple was not surrender. It was calculation. 3 days after the full moon, a royal messenger arrived. He bore the mark of Pharaoh Setepenre, whose name made men bow before hearing his will. The scroll was tied with gold thread, sealed with lapis wax, and written in the unmistakable red ink of royal wrath. The message was short. The House of Echoes is to be burned before Ra wakes. The woman called Khenmet will be escorted to Thebes for judgment. The villagers were stunned. Many wept. Others urged her to flee. "Disappear into the desert," they begged. "Go south. Find refuge among the Nubians. Start anew." But Khenmet did not run. She stood in the center of the courtyard, flute in hand, eyes fixed on the horizon. "They fear a song," she said. "Let them hear it again." That night, the women of the village carried pots of water and lined the walls with damp cloth. The children stayed with elders in nearby homes, while those who had once learned under Khenmet stood side by side with her, flutes ready, hearts burning. As the first light of dawn spilled over the distant dunes, temple guards arrived. Behind them came torchbearers and a cart carrying kindling. Panefer rode in a litter, smug and robed in gold-threaded linen. He stepped down and addressed the crowd. "This is not punishment," he lied. "This is purification, a cleansing of the misled." Khenmet stepped forward. "Then let me burn with it." A hush fell. The villagers gasped, but she did not tremble. Her eyes locked on Panefer's, and for a brief moment, the proud priest faltered. "No!" a voice called from the crowd. It was an old man, once a silent market vendor, now holding his granddaughter's hand. "If she burns, we all burn." Another voice rose, then another, until the square pulsed with one chant. "We are the song." The guards hesitated. Torchbearers froze. Panefer barked an order, but no one moved. Fear had shifted. It no longer belonged to the people. It clung now to the priest's chest like a serpent. Khenmet turned and climbed the steps of her house. She raised her flute, not in defiance, but in ceremony. She played Menmatre's melody, the one that once made birds hush and stars tilt their ears. One by one, flutes joined her. Hundreds. The sound swelled, not wild but woven, a hymn older than pharaohs, stronger than walls. Guards lowered their torches. Some wept. Even the wind paused to listen. Panefer shouted again, but his voice was swallowed by the sea of music. The commander of the guard stepped forward, tore the decree in half, and dropped the pieces into the dust. "No one burns today." Panefer turned, robe flaring, and vanished into the crowd like a shadow at noon. The House of Echoes remained. That night the village held a feast, not in celebration of victory, but of survival. Khenmet sat beside the fire, children curled at her feet, women braiding her hair with lotus strands. A young mother leaned close and asked, "What do we do now?" Khenmet looked toward the stars. "We sing louder, we build more houses, and we never forget that even fire fears a voice that won't be silenced." 3 weeks after the decree was defied and Panefer disappeared from the village, a new message arrived. This time not on royal parchment, but on embroidered linen, sealed with wax bearing the lotus emblem of Queen Izetnefret, the great wife of Pharaoh Setepenre. The courier was not a guard, but a woman, tall, cloaked in ivory linen and gold-trimmed sandals, her eyes outlined with the calm certainty of someone who walked where most women were forbidden. She bowed to Khenmet and spoke with reverence, not authority. "The queen has heard of your melodies. She requests your presence in Thebes. Not demands. Requests." The difference made Khenmet pause. For a moment she saw her old self, beaten, trembling, silent. That girl would have run. But the woman she had become stood tall, thanked the courier, and promised to come after the next moon. When she turned to her people, they were afraid. Not for themselves, but for her. "What if it's a trap?" Tepi whispered. "What if they want to punish you where no one can protect you?" Khenmet placed a hand on the girl's cheek. "Then I will go singing." Preparations began. The villagers gifted her woven cloaks, bread for the journey, amulets blessed by local healers. One man carved her a new flute from the sacred fig tree, its mouthpiece shaped like a falcon's beak. When the day came, the entire village walked with her to the edge of the river, their songs echoing through the reeds. She boarded a royal boat, its sails as white as ibis wings, and watched her home fade into the morning mist. The journey to Thebes was long, but she did not spend it in silence. She played her flute as they passed villages, and people emerged to listen. Farmers, children, even priests who bowed instead of scowled. Word traveled ahead of her like incense in wind. By the time she reached Thebes, people gathered on the banks, waiting not for a queen, but for her. The palace was larger than any building she had ever seen. Its columns reached the sky, its floors cool with polished stone. But what struck her was the hush. Inside the home of Pharaoh, silence reigned. Not the silence of peace, but of power. Queen Izetnefret received her alone in a garden of myrrh trees and blue lilies. She was older than Khenmet expected, but her gaze was sharper than obsidian. "Tell me," the queen said, sipping lotus tea, "how did a girl from dust teach the Nile to sing?" Khenmet did not kneel. She looked her in the eyes and replied, "I remembered what they tried to make me forget, that I was born with a voice." The queen laughed, not cruelly, but with admiration. "And now they want me to make you stop." Khenmet blinked. "Do you intend to?" "No," said the queen, setting down her cup. "I intend to learn." That evening, Khenmet played in the queen's private court. Noble women gathered, cloaked in gold, yet drawn to the sound of simple flutes and unspoken truths. They closed their eyes and wept, not from sorrow, but from recognition. The next day, Pharaoh himself requested an audience. Khenmet stood beneath the throne platform, unshaking, her flute tucked beneath her arm like a scepter. The ruler of the two lands looked at her and asked, "Are you the girl they tried to silence?" "No," she replied. "I'm the woman who sings anyway." And for the first time in the royal court, music rose, not in praise of gods or kings, but of truth. Pharaoh said nothing for a long time. Then he stood, walked down the steps, and handed her a blank papyrus scroll. "Write your own decree," he said, "and I will seal it." Khenmet stared at the blank papyrus scroll in her hands as if it were the Nile itself, vast, powerful, and full of dangerous promise. A single mistake, a single wrong word, and it could wash everything away. But if written with truth, it could nourish 1,000 futures. She stood before Pharaoh Seti-Penre in the golden hall of Mut, where laws were born and history was carved. Around her, scribes waited with sharpened reeds. Temple priests shifted nervously, and Queen Izetnefret stood like a silent wall between Khenmet and every unspoken threat in the room. "Speak your decree," said Pharaoh, his voice calm but expectant. Khenmet's breath was slow and steady. This was not a performance. This was a reckoning. She raised her head and began, "Let it be known across both lands that no girl born with breath shall be denied her voice, that music shall not be bound to gender or castes, that questions shall not be punished, and that teaching, whether through word, rhythm, or silence, shall be a right, not a rebellion." Murmurs rippled like wind through papyrus fields. One priest scoffed loudly. "This is dangerous." Khenmet turned to him. "What's dangerous is telling the future to stay quiet because the past is afraid." The queen stepped forward then. "I will sponsor her decree." Pharaoh raised an eyebrow. "You would challenge the temples?" "I would remind them," she said, "that harmony requires many instruments, not just drums of control." For a moment the room held its breath. Then Pharaoh nodded. "So it is written. So it shall be done." The royal scribe etched her words into red ink, and the decree was sealed with the symbol of Ra and the queen's signature. Khenmet was no longer a girl with a flute. She was law. She stayed in Thebes for several moons, teaching not just girls but noblewomen, guards' wives, and even reluctant scholars. The House of Echoes back home became a sanctuary supported by royal grain. More rose across the land. Echo houses in Memphis, Hermopolis, Abydos. Each played its own tune, but each held the same rhythm: courage. One day, as Khenmet walked through the royal gardens, she found a girl alone beneath a fig tree. She wore silks, but her face held the same fear Khenmet once knew. "They want me to marry a man thrice my age," the girl whispered. "He treats me like a caged ibis." Khenmet sat beside her. "Do you know how to breathe?" The girl nodded. "Then you already know how to sing. We'll start from there." That night the girl played her first tune before the queen herself. It was raw and cracked, but it echoed. And that echo stirred something even the laws of stone had never touched. Meanwhile, in a forgotten village near Thebes, an old priest named Panifer sat alone, listening to wind pass through reeds. No more followers, no more sermons, just the sound of the voice he failed to bury. And in that sound, a quiet sentence formed in his aging mind. "She became the hymn I tried to silence." Back in Thebes, as the city lit its torches and drums rolled in temples to honor Ra's descent, Khenmet stood on the palace balcony, flute in hand, watching the people below. Some waved, some prayed, others just listened. Her melody soared into the dusk, not to beg, not to resist, but to remind the world. Some songs are not just heard, they are remembered. As Khenmet's decree spread like warm wind across the kingdom, its echoes traveled farther than she imagined. Beyond the walls of Thebes, past the reach of Pharaoh's banners, deep into Nubia where the Nile narrowed and the sands spoke in older tongues. In the southern city of Napata, word reached a queen named Amanikatashan, who ruled with wisdom and fire. She had heard tales of a woman in the north who sang down priests and wrote her own law. At first she laughed. "The north births many stories," she said. But when a traveling merchant played a strange, soul-deep tune on a reed flute in her market square, Amanikatashan froze. "Where did you learn that melody?" "From a girl in Memphis," he said. "She was taught by Khenmet of Thebes." The queen sent riders that very night. A scroll was penned in golden ink and carried across riverbanks and shifting dunes, sealed not with wax but with a carved obsidian pendant, the Nubian mark of honor. When the message reached Thebes, Khenmet unwrapped it with care. The words inside were simple: "If your voice can stir sand, come let it move mountains." The queen of Nubia invited her south. It was not a command, not a threat, but a sister's call. Khenmet left Thebes quietly, telling only the queen and a few trusted students. She did not want ceremony. She wanted honesty. The journey was hard. Steep cliffs, narrow passes, scorching sun, but it felt right, as if every dune remembered her steps before she took them. When she arrived at the golden-walled palace of Amanikatashan, guards bowed not because of titles, but because of legacy. The queen greeted her without a throne, without fanfare. Just two women, one young, one seasoned, standing beneath a tamarind tree. "I expected a storm," Amanikatashan said, "and I find a breeze." "Even breezes reshape dunes," Khenmet replied. That night they walked the palace walls together, overlooking a city carved in moonlight. "Our women sing," the queen said, "but they still sing in shadows. Our temples are loud, our men louder." "Then we must teach them a different volume," Khenmet said. Over the following weeks, she stayed in Napata and taught what she knew, Not just melodies, but the art of listening, the power of silence that chooses when to speak. Nubian girls arrived barefoot and wide-eyed. Some had been herders, others scribes' daughters. All were eager. For the first time, Khenmet began transcribing music, not just sounds, but stories. She drew new symbols, curves for breath, dots for pain, waves for courage. Nubian scribes copied them eagerly, creating scrolls unlike any the desert had seen. It was no longer just music. It was a language. One evening, an old man arrived from a distant hill village. He was bent with age, hands calloused. He carried no offerings, only a broken lyre. "I came to fix this," he said. "But maybe it's not the lyre that's broken." Khenmet took his hands gently and sat with him by the river. She didn't ask his past. She let the silence speak. Together they played. The notes came slowly, but they came. That night, in the shadow of palm trees, even elders wept. The queen of Nubia wept too. "You did not move mountains," she told Khenmet. "You reminded them how to hum." Word of Nubia's awakening traveled back north, and Thebes watched as a new house opened in Napata, the House of Rising Echoes. In it, on its first wall, a line was painted in red clay. "Voices do not belong to borders." The sun over Napata rose like a hymn, golden and slow, as if the gods themselves had paused to watch what was unfolding in the south. The House of Rising Echoes, once a quiet experiment, had grown into a sanctuary that defied walls and titles. Fishermen sent their daughters. Temple guards sent their sisters. Even old scholars began attending, curious to learn why their rigid scrolls suddenly felt hollow. Khenmet stood at the center of it all, not as a ruler or priestess, but as a guide, patient, firm, open. She had not returned to Thebes. Letters came from Queen Izetnefret urging her return, asking for counsel. But Khenmet wrote back, "What I began in the north has taken root in the south. To leave now would be to silence what has just begun to sing." Then, one morning, as she taught a group of students under an acacia tree, the earth trembled, not with quake or fear, but with footsteps. An entourage arrived, cloaked in deep blue, carrying banners marked by twin falcons. At their center rode a priestess unlike any Khenmet had seen. Her skin was burnished bronze, her face painted with crushed lapis, and her eyes lined with fire. "I am Mynira," she said, dismounting. "High voice of the Temple of Serket. We have heard of you even in the far sands, and we have come not to stop you, but to ask, will you teach us?" The students froze. A temple voice, trained by gods, feared by kings, was kneeling. Khenmet offered her hand and said only, "Sit, the song waits for all." Over the coming days, Mynira stayed, listening more than she spoke, slowly unraveling the armor of ritual that had long been mistaken for reverence. On the third night, as the moon hung full and silent, Mynira confessed, "I was taught that devotion required silence, that women must carry worship, not lead it. But your songs, they feel like prayer." "They are," Khenmet said, "but not to gods who demand silence, to the ones who listen." Word of Mynira's transformation spread like Nile mist. Temples in the outer provinces began sending their own priestesses, quietly, humbly, cloaked in fear, but returning cloaked in light. What began as rebellion now felt like rebirth. One afternoon, an elder from a high temple in Elephantine came bearing a worn tablet and an uneasy expression. "Our oldest scrolls," he explained, "mention a prophecy, that a woman with a broken voice would teach even gods to weep." He looked at Khenmet with uncertainty. "Perhaps you are she." Khenmet did not claim it. She only replied, "Perhaps all women with broken voices are." That night, in a sacred chamber of the temple once forbidden to women, Khenmet played. The flute's notes curled upward into the incense-soaked air, bounced against gold-covered walls, and reached the ears of stone statues, silent for centuries. Some said they saw the eyes of the goddess Serket glisten. Others claimed the stone lion outside shifted, as if leaning to hear. Whether truth or myth, something shifted deeper than stone. Belief. The priests no longer ordered. They listened. The gods, once thought to speak only through kings, now spoke through music, through melody, through girls who had once been beaten for asking why. At sunrise, Khenmet stood by the river with Mynira beside her. "The gods are not what I thought," the priestess whispered. "They never were," Khenmet replied. "They were only ever echoes of us." And in that moment, with the reeds rustling like applause and doves lifting into the sky, even the silence sang. Years passed like flowing water, never still, never the same. What began as a whisper beneath a tamarisk tree had become a movement etched into the rhythm of Egypt and Nubia alike. Khenmet, once a silent girl with bruised lips, was now known in distant cities by names she never chose. The flame that sang, the voice of the river, the woman who taught gods to weep. But she remained unchanged at heart. She still rose with the sun, played her flute beneath the trees, and taught not with pride, but with patience. Echo houses now stood in 12 cities, some grand, some simple. Each one filled with girls and boys learning not just how to make music, but how to reclaim the sounds stolen from their mothers and grandmothers. Some became musicians, others healers. Some simply learned how to speak without fear. And still, Khenmet refused titles. "I am not a queen," she would say. "I only remembered the tune the world forgot." One morning, as mist curled above the Nile, a girl named Sahur came to her. She was 12, born with a twisted foot and a voice that stuttered like broken papyrus. Her family believed she had no future, but Khenmet listened, not to the stammering, but to the rhythm behind it. In Sahur's brokenness, she heard a new melody. Within a year, Sahura had composed songs unlike any before. One was so moving it was sent to Thebes, where it was performed in the temple of Hathor, by women, the first time that had ever happened. And so, the cycle renewed itself. Khenmet planted seeds she would never see bloom. She knew that. She welcomed it. Change, like music, lived best in echoes. In her later years, she no longer traveled. Her hair silvered, her steps slowed, but her spirit remained sharp as sunlight on the river. One evening, as the stars blinked into being, a letter arrived from Queen Izetnefret's granddaughter, now Pharaoh's wife. It read, "I sit on a throne you softened. I speak in halls you opened. I owe you not just my voice, but my freedom." Khenmet smiled, then looked to the sky. "Men matre," she whispered. "Look how far the song has gone." That night she played one final tune. It was not sad. It was full of thanks. For every broken note that taught her how to rise. For every silence that helped her understand sound. For every hand that once struck her, but never stopped her. The next morning, she was gone. Peacefully. A flute resting across her chest. The villagers did not mourn with wails. They gathered by the river and played. Hundreds of flutes rose into the sky, the air thick with notes that kissed the dawn. She was buried beneath an acacia tree, her name carved not in stone but sung into the wind. Her grave bore no title, no glory, only a single line. She taught us to listen. Generations passed, temples rose and fell, kings were forgotten, but the House of Echoes endured. Children still learned there, their melodies floating through markets and palaces alike. Some who played did not know her name, but every time they closed their eyes and let the music guide them, she returned. Quietly, fiercely, eternally. For songs, when born of truth, never die. They only become the breath between worlds, and so, the girl they beat for speaking became the woman who made the world sing.